The laugh echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. It wasn't a discreet laugh, it was loud, cruel, theatrical, the kind of laugh that makes everyone stop and stare. Prosecutor Marcus Brennan, in his impeccable Italian suit and slicked-back gray hair, pointed directly at the man sitting in the dock and laughed again. "Really? This guy is going to convince me he's innocent?" Marcus said, turning to the small audience of lawyers and interns present in the room. "Look at him, it looks like he ate all the evidence in the case." The entire courtroom froze. Some laughed softly, others looked away, embarrassed. The clerk stopped typing. The security guard near the door closed his eyes as if he wanted to disappear, but the man in the dock didn't move. His name was Daniel Carver. He was 38 years old with broad shoulders, a prominent belly, and a round face that carried a disturbing calm. He wore a cheap gray suit slightly cinched at the waist and held a worn leather briefcase in his hands. Daniel didn't react to the insult. He just tilted his head slightly as if he was mentally taking note of every word Marcus said. "Sorry, fatty, but you're wasting my time," Marcus continued, pacing back and forth with practiced confidence. "Do you really think you can come in here and convince me that you didn't embezzle company funds? Dude, you can't even control what you eat. How am I supposed to believe you control money?" The room became even quieter. Daniel's public defender, a young lawyer named Rachel, stood up hesitantly. "Your Excellency, this is—" Relax, Rachel." Marcus cut her off with a smile. "I'm just being realistic. Look at him. I bet he can't even run from a chocolate bar, let alone a criminal charge." More laughs. This time, louder. Daniel finally looked up. Not angry, not ashamed, just watching. His dark eyes raked over Marcus's face as if he were memorizing every feature, every arrogant gesture. And then he did something unexpected. Smiled. It was a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it was there. Marcus frowned. "Did you find it funny?" "No," Daniel replied calmly. His voice was deep, slow, and carried a strange weight. "I was just thinking about how eloquent you are." Marcus blinked, confused. "Eloquent? Yes, you have a very particular way of expressing yourself. I bet you've gone far with this talent." The phrase sounded like a compliment, but there was something there. A tone. One layer. Marcus couldn't identify it, so he laughed again. Okay. Continue with those cheap philosophy phrases, chubby. It won't save you." Daniel didn't respond. He just looked down at the folder in his hands again. What Marcus didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Daniel Carver wasn't just a defendant accused of embezzlement. He was much more than that. Thorstad diced you 3 weeks earlier. Daniel was sitting in a small, quiet cafe in the city center, away from the courts, away from the accusations, away from the judging eyes. He drank black coffee and read a thick book on criminal legislation. His cell phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "Congratulations, Dr. Carver. Your appointment as substitute judge of the 4th Criminal Court has been approved. Commencement scheduled for October 22nd. Documentation attached." Daniel read the message 3 times. Then he put his cell phone away and went back to the book. He knew this day would come. I had studied for it, fought for it, survived every humiliation, every joke, every look of contempt throughout the years of college, master's degrees, competitions. But there were still 3 weeks to go. And in those 3 weeks, he would just be Daniel Carver, a common defendant in a lawsuit set up by a corrupt company that unfairly fired him and now tried to destroy him. He smiled slightly to himself. Let's see who has the last laugh. Back in court, Marcus was finishing his opening statement with his usual pomp. "Gentlemen, this case is simple," he said, spreading his arms like an actor on stage. "We have a disgruntled, incompetent employee who stole from his own company and is now trying to play the victim. He has no defense. He has no witnesses. He has no future." Rachel took a deep breath but didn't say anything. Daniel remained motionless. The chief judge, a tired man in his 60s, banged his gavel. "Next session in a week. It's closed." As everyone left, Marcus passed by Daniel and whispered with a venomous smile, "Hey, fat guy, enjoy this week. Because after it, you're going to spend a good few years reflecting on your choices and your diet." Daniel didn't respond, but when Marcus turned his back, he opened the folder and slid his fingers over an official document with the Court of Justice's coat of arms. In the first line it was written, "Appointment Substitute Judge, Daniel Augusto Carver." He closed the paste slowly, and for the first time in weeks, a genuine smile was allowed. The following week was a spectacle of public humiliation. Marcus Brennan not only processed Daniel Carver, he showed him as a trophy. Each preliminary audience became a performance. Each technical argument was accompanied by weight jokes, on failure, on insignificance. And the worst, it worked. The other promoters laughed in the corridors. Trainees took discreet photos when Daniel passed. At one of the breaks, someone left a gym pamphlet at the defense table with an anonymous ticket. "You need this more than a lawyer." Rachel, the public defender, found Daniel sitting alone in the forum's waiting room 3 days after the first hearing. He had his paste open on his lap, reviewing documents with a hand-marked pen in his hand. "Daniel, we need to talk," she said, pulling a chair next to him. He looked up but did not stop reading. "What? About giving up?" Daniel paused, finally closed the folder and stared at it. "To give up?" Rachel sighed, running her hand through her short hair. "Look, I know you haven't diverted that money, I believe you. But Marcus Brennan is relentless. He has connections, has experience, and, frankly, he's using you as an example." "Example of what?" "That he never loses." Rachel lowered her voice. "He does this, Daniel. Choose a small case, transforms into a circus, crushes the defendant publicly, and uses it to climb his career. You're not the first." Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he opened the folder again and read again. "So, you think I should accept an agreement?" "I think you should survive," Rachel responded firmly. Accepts his proposal. 3 years of alternative penalty. Small fine without prison. It's better than risking 8 years in jail. Daniel smiled slightly, without taking his eyes off the document. "Rachel, have you ever seen a lion accept crumbs?" She frowned. "What?" "Nothing." He closed the folder again and got up. "Thanks for the concern, but I won't give up." Rachel watched him out, confused and frustrated. What she didn't know was that Daniel wasn't reading the defense of the process. He was reading Marcus Brennan's disciplinary history. 2 days later, at the instructional hearing, Marcus raised the level of cruelty. The room was fuller this time. There were local journalists, law students, and even some people who simply wanted to watch the Prosecutor Brennan show, as some they called. Marcus entered as always, confident, smiling, greeting everyone like a movie star. Daniel came in shortly thereafter, silent, serious, loading the same shabby paste. When he passed Marcus, the prosecutor made a point of whispering loud enough for the next to hear, "It brought a snack, because the audience will be long and I know you can't stand without eating." Muffled laughs exploded around. Daniel did not answer. He only followed his place next to Rachel. The starting judge, Judge Howard, hit the hammer. "Let's start. Prosecutor Brennan, his witnesses." Marcus called 3 witnesses from the company that had fired Daniel: the chief financial officer, the HR manager, and an accountant. Everyone repeated the same rehearsed story. Daniel had access to the back. Daniel was under financial pressure. Daniel was problematic at work. But it was during the testimony of the HR manager that Marcus crossed the line. "Mrs. Thompson," Marcus began, walking slowly in front of the witness. "Could you describe the defendant's behavior in the workplace?" The woman hesitated. "Well, he was quiet. He didn't socialize much." "Why?" "I don't know. Maybe shyness?" Marcus smiled. "Or maybe because no one wanted to have lunch with someone who ate for 3? The room exploded in laughs. Rachel got up immediately. "Object, this is sustained," the judge said, but without emotion. "Mr. Brennan, keep the focus." Marcus raised his hands in false surrender, but the damage was already done. Daniel remained motionless, but his hands tightened lightly the edge of the table. Rachel looked at him, worried. "Daniel, are you okay?" "Perfectly," he answered softly, but it wasn't. That night, Daniel returned to his small apartment around the city. It was a simple place: a bedroom, a tight kitchen, shelves full of legal books. He threw the paste on the couch and went straight to the bathroom mirror. He looked at himself, the round face, the wide shoulders, the belly that has always been the target of jokes since childhood. For a moment, just one, he allowed the pain to enter. He remembered the laughs at school, of the nicknames, the times it was chosen last in sport, of job interviews where you saw the contempt, the recruiter's eyes even before opening his mouth. Remembered the constant humiliation. And then he remembered something else. He remembered the day he was approved in the order exam. He remembered the letter of appointment to the position of substitute judge. He remembered every battle won in silence, away from the spotlight, away from the laughs. Daniel closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When it opened them again, there was no pain. There was fire. He returned to the room, took the cell phone and typed a message for a contact saved only as Dr. Silva, Corregidoria. "I need a meeting. Urgent. I have information on inadequate conduct of acting prosecutor." The answer came in seconds. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., bring everything." Daniel smiled. He had everything. The next morning, Marcus Brennan woke up with a notification on his cell phone. It was an automatic court of the Court of Justice. Magistrate change. Case number 4728, 2024. Judge Howard will be temporarily replaced for health reasons. New holder judge takes over 48 hours. Marcus read over and shrugged. "So much," he murmured, throwing his cell phone on the table. "I'll crush that fat anyway." What Marcus didn't read was the second line of the email, the line that said the name of the substitute judge, Daniel Augusto Carver. Try again. Daniel entered the Internal Affairs building at 8:50 a.m. The building was imposing, all in gray marble and dark glass, located in the administrative center of the judicial complex. Few people had reason to be there, and even less they went out smiling. He carried the sloppy paste under his arm and a neutral expression on his face. He climbed to the 4th floor without haste, as if he was just fulfilling another bureaucratic obligation. The secretary received him with a look of poorly disguised compassion. "Dr. Silva is waiting. You can enter." Daniel nodded and opened the door. Dr. Renato Silva was a thin man with thin glasses and completely white hair. He was reputed to be relentless with deviations of conduct, and to protect the integrity of the judicial system as if it were religion. He was sitting behind a huge table, reviewing papers. He looked up when Daniel entered. "Mr. Carver," he said, pointing to the chair ahead. "Sit." Daniel obeyed, placing the paste on his lap. "Thanks for receiving me, Dr. Silva. You said you had information about inadequate conduct." Renato took his glasses and stared at him directly. "I hope it is not a waste of time." "It is not." Daniel opened the folder and started taking documents one by one, organizing them on the table with the accuracy of those who had done it 1,000 times mentally. Marcus Brennan, prosecutor for 12 years. Exemplary history on paper, but in the last 5 years he has developed a pattern. Renato frowned. "What kind of standard?" "He chooses vulnerable defendants, usually people without resources, no connections, no strong defense. Transforms processes into public shows, use humiliation as a strategy, and then uses victories as a political trampoline." Daniel slid 3 newspaper clippings around the table. Case of 2021, defendant with mental disabilities. Marcus made jokes about cognitive capacity during the hearing. Case filed for lack of ethics from the prosecutor, but no one was punished. Another document. Case of 2022, woman accused of theft. Marcus publicly hinted that she was a prostitute. She was acquitted, but committed suicide 3 months later. Renato took the paper, read in silence, and his expression hardened. Case 2023, Daniel continued. Immigrant accused of fraud. Marcus wore racial stereotypes in the heart. The judge did nothing. The press didn't cover. He packed 5 more similar cases. Everyone follows the same script. Public humiliation, judicial negligence, easy victory. Marcus rises. Victims sink. Renato was silent for a long moment, flipping through the documents. "Why are you bringing me this now?" Daniel took a deep breath. "Because I am the next victim, and because in 48 hours, I assume as a substitute judge of the 4th Criminal Court." Renato's eyes widened slightly. "Are you Daniel Carver from that appointment?" "I am." Renato leaned over his chair, suing. "So you want me to investigate Marcus before you take over?" "No." Daniel leaned forward. "I want the Lord to observe, document, and when he crosses the line again, and he will cross, I want the Lord to be ready to act." Renato studied Daniel for a moment. "You're planning something." "I'm planning justice." A tense silence filled the room. Finally, Renato nodded slowly. "I'll keep my eyes open. But Carver, be careful. Marcus has powerful friends." Daniel got up, picked up the folder, and reached out. "Me too." Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus Brennan was in his private office at the Ministry Public, celebrating. There was an open bottle of expensive whiskey on the table, 2 glasses, and his assistant, a young prosecutor named Greg, sat at the front with a smarmy smile. "Another one on the bill, boss," Greg said, raising his glass. "That fatty doesn't have a chance." Marcus laughed, filling his own glass. "I know, but it's fun. Did you see his face when I made that joke about eating the evidence? Priceless. Do you think he'll take the deal?" "Of course you will. They always accept." Marcus took a long drink. "In the end, everyone breaks. It's just a matter of pressure." Greg hesitated. "What if he doesn't accept?" Marcus shrugged. "Then I'll crush him at trial. It's as simple as that." He slammed the glass on the table. "Greg, don't you understand yet? In court, it doesn't matter what the truth is. It matters who tells the best story. And I always tell the best story. What about the new substitute judge? Do you know who will take over for Howard?" "I have no idea, and I don't care." Marcus lit a cigar. "Judges are all the same. As long as I shine in the room, they'll go with me." Greg laughed along. What neither of them knew was that, at that exact moment, the Internal Affairs Secretary was sending an email to the Court of Justice office. Subject: Open preliminary investigation. Prosecutor Marcus Brennan. 2 days later, on the morning of Daniel's inauguration as substitute judge, he woke up early, took a shower. He wore the only suit he owned, the same worn gray one. He looked in the mirror and straightened his tie. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to smile. It wasn't a revenge smile. It was a smile of someone who was finally where they deserved to be. He picked up the folder, now full of new documents and including the ownership certificate, and left the house. At 10 a.m., Daniel was in the courtroom of the 4th Criminal Court, but not as a defendant, as a judge. He entered through the side door, accompanied by 2 bailiffs, and went up to the central stand. The room was empty, still being prepared for the first official session. Daniel sat in the tall, dark leather chair and looked out over the courtroom from the vantage point he always dreamed of having. The view was different from there, powerful, fair. He opened the folder and reviewed the day's agenda. First case of the afternoon. Case number 4728, 2024. Public Prosecutor's Office versus Daniel Augusto Carver. He smiled again. It'll be interesting, he muttered to himself. At 2 p.m., the courtroom began to fill up. Rachel arrived first, looking exhausted. She didn't know about the change. He still believed Daniel was just an unlucky defendant about to be crushed. Then came the journalists, law students, some curious, and then Marcus Brennan entered. He was radiant, as always. Impeccable navy blue suit, Italian leather briefcase, hair gel. He greeted some acquaintances, waved to the journalists, and sat at the public prosecutor's office table with the confidence of someone who already knew the result. He still hadn't looked at the judge's bench. The clerk banged the gavel. Standing for the entrance of His Excellency the substitute judge, the side door opened, and Daniel Augusto Carver entered, wearing the black toga, carrying the same worn-out briefcase, climbing up to the central stand with firm and safe steps. Marcus Brennan froze. His smile disappeared. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Rachel looked from Daniel to Marcus, completely lost. And Daniel, finally sitting in the judge's chair, opened the briefcase, picked up the gavel and knocked once. The session is open. His voice echoed through the room like silent thunder. Marcus was pale. His hands shook slightly as he tried to process what he was seeing. Daniel looked up and looked directly at him. "Good morning, Dr. Brennan. Ready to begin?" The silence that took over the room was so dense that it seemed to suck in the oxygen. Marcus Brennan was frozen, his fingers gripping the edge of the prosecutor's table, his eyes fixed on Daniel as if he were seeing a ghost. Rachel turned her head so fast she almost hurt her neck. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Journalists whispered among themselves, cameras already being discreetly raised, and Daniel, sitting on the judge's bench with the black robe covering his broad shoulders, remained completely calm. He arranged the papers in front of him with precise movements as if this were just another day at work. "Dr. Brennan," Daniel repeated, his deep voice echoing through the room. "I asked if you are ready to begin." Marcus blinked, once, twice. He tried to form a word, but all that came out was a strangled sound. Your Excellency, is there some mistake?" "There is no mistake." Daniel opened the folder and took out a document, holding it up so Marcus could see. "Certificate of possession, issued 3 days ago. Substitute judge of the 4th Criminal Court. Everything in accordance with legal procedures." Ellen put the paper down and faced Marcus directly. "Unless you are questioning the legitimacy of the appointment?" Marcus opened his mouth. It closed. His skin was pale, sweat starting to form on his forehead. Rachel finally found her voice. "Daniel, are you a judge?" He looked at her and gave a slight smile. "Surprise, Rachel." She sat down heavily in the chair, placing her hand on her forehead. "My God." Daniel turned his attention to Marcus. "Well, Dr. Brennan, shall we proceed, or do you need a moment to compose yourself?" Marcus took a deep breath, trying desperately to regain his composure. He straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and forced a wry smile. "No, Your Excellency. I'm fine." "Excellent." Daniel hit the gavel once. "So let's review case number 4728, 2024. Public Prosecutor's Office against Daniel Augusto Carver." Marcus swallowed. "Your Excellency, perhaps it would be prudent, considering that Your Excellency is a party to the process, perhaps it would be better to declare suspicion and—" "Suspicion?" Daniel interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "Why would I declare myself a suspect, Dr. Brennan?" "Well, because Your Excellency is the defendant." "It was the defendant," Daniel corrected, his voice cutting like a blade. "The moment I took this position, I formally waived my right to self-defense in this case." Dr. Rachel Hayes continues as the official public defender. "I am now simply the magistrate responsible for ensuring that justice is done impartially." He leaned forward slightly. "Unless you believe me to be incapable of impartiality." Marcus was cornered. "If I said yes, I would be insulting a judge. If I said no, I would have to move on." "No, Your Excellency. I trust Your Excellency's impartiality." The words came out like crushed glass. Daniel nodded slowly. "Good. So let's get to the facts." He opened the file and started leafing through it. "Dr. Brennan, you accuse the the former defendant, of embezzling funds worth $42,000 from the company Global Tech Solutions. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Excellency. And the evidence presented includes bank records, statements from 3 witnesses and internal company reports. Correct?" "Correct." Daniel stopped leafing through and looked up. "Interesting. Because I've spent the last few days going over every single comma of this process, and I've found some inconsistencies. Marcus went rigid. Inconsistencies, Your Excellency? Yes. Daniel took another document. For example, bank records show transfers to an offshore account, but that account is not in Mr. Carver's name. It is in the name of a shell company called Apex Consulting LLC. He slid the paper across the table toward Marcus. Did you investigate who the real owner of this company is? Marcus looked at the paper but didn't pick it up. Your Excellency, that is irrelevant. The money was under the defendant's responsibility. Answer the question, Dr. Brennan. Daniel's tone was glacial. Marcus hesitated. No, we haven't investigated deeply. They didn't investigate, Daniel repeated slowly, as if he was chewing on each word. So you accused a man of embezzling funds without even checking where the money actually went? Your Excellency, the evidence pointed to... The evidence? Daniel slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make the entire room startle. Dr. Brennan, evidence is not evidence. Evidence is a starting point for investigation, not for formal accusation. He stood up, and for the first time, the grandeur of his figure became clear to everyone. It wasn't just the weight, it was the presence, the authority. But let's go further. Daniel took another document. The witnesses: Mrs. Thompson, HR manager; Mr. Davies, finance director; Mr. Oleg, accountant. He looked at Marcus. Interestingly, all three were fired or reassigned from Global Tech exactly 2 weeks after giving evidence in this case. Did you know that? Marcus paled even more. I am not. No, Daniel held up the paper. Because I have termination letters here, and they all mention internal restructuring as the reason. How convenient, right? Rachel was open-mouthed, taking notes frantically. Daniel continued. And there's more. I requested Global Tech's complete records for the last 3 years. Do you know what I found? Absolute silence. That the company is under federal investigation for tax fraud. That the true owner of Apex Consulting LLC is the CEO of Global Tech, Mr. Richard Moss. And that Mr. Carver was fired exactly 3 days after submitting an internal report alleging accounting irregularities. The room erupted in murmurs. Marcus was as white as a sheet. Your Excellency, I had no knowledge. You weren't aware? Daniel cut him off, his voice thundering. You are a 12-year prosecutor, Dr. Brennan. Your obligation is to have knowledge. Your obligation is to investigate. Your obligation is to seek the truth, not the easiest condemnation. He turned around the bench, down until he was at the same level of the room. But instead, the Lord chose to turn this case into a show. He made jokes about my weight. He humbled me publicly. He tried to break me, all because I was an easy target, because I had no resources, because the Lord thought I could use me as a step for his career. Marcus tried to speak, but no sound came out. Daniel approached slowly, stopping a few steps from him. But do you know what you didn't know, Dr. Brennan? He leaned slightly. That I've spent the last 8 years studying, fighting, going up every step of the judiciary as people like you laughed at me. And now here I am, not as your victim, but as your judge. The room was in sepulchral silence. Daniel returned to the bench and hit the hammer. This process is closed for lack of serious proof and irregularities. Mr. Daniel Carver is officially acquitted of all accusations. Timid applause began to emerge among the gifts. Daniel lifted his hand. Silence them. But we don't end. He looked straight at Marcus. Dr. Brennan, considering the serious failures in conducting this case, I am forwarding a complete report to the Public Prosecution Service, recommending investigation for procedural misconduct and abuse of authority. Marcus staggered as if he had punched. Excellence. Please. In addition, Daniel continued relentlessly, I am requesting all cases conducted by the Lord in the last 5 years to be reviewed on suspicion of investigative neglect. The bomb fell. Marcus collapsed in his chair, his face buried in his hands. Daniel hit the hammer for the last time. The session is closed. The news spread like fire. In less than 2 hours, the audience video was already circulating on social networks. Someone had discreetly filmed the exact moment when Marcus Brennan realized who the new judge was, and the recording became viral. Arrogant prosecutor is judged by the man who humiliated was the most shared headline. The comments exploded. Poetic justice in its purest form. This judge is my hero. Marcus Brennan finally found someone bigger than him, literally and figuratively. Within 24 hours, 3 great news portals published stories about the case. 2 local TV channels called for an interview with Daniel, and the Public Prosecution Service officially announced the opening of investigation against Marcus Brennan. But Daniel didn't give interviews. He simply returned to work. Week later, Daniel was in his office at the Court of Justice. It was a modest room, with shelves full of legal books, a dark wooden table, and a window that gave to the city center. He reviewed processes when they heard knocks on the door. Between, Rachel entered carrying a folder and an embarrassed smile. "Hi, Daniel. Or better, Excellence." He looked up and smiled slightly. "Rachel, when we're alone, can call me Daniel." She sat in front of him, still processing everything. "You knew from the beginning, didn't you? You knew, and it didn't tell me." Daniel closed the process he read and stared at her directly. "If I had told, you would have acted differently. I would have trusted too much, and I needed everything to seem real, that Marcus believed he was winning." Rachel shook her head, laughing softly. "You're scary, you know? I'm fair," he corrected. "There is a difference." She opened the folder and slid a document on the table. "So here it is. Marcus Brennan was formally removed from duties while the investigation continues. 5 of his cases are already being reviewed, and 3 earlier victims have already filed moral damage." Daniel took the paper, read in silence, and nodded. "Good. Good?" Rachel repeated incredulously. "Daniel, you destroyed his career. He's over." "No." Daniel returned the document. "He was destroyed. I just made sure the truth came to light." Rachel was silent for a moment, watching him. "You planned all this, didn't you?" Daniel did not respond immediately. He only leaned against his chair, his fingers intertwined over his chest. "Rachel, I spent my whole life being underestimated. At school, in college, in job interviews. People looked at me and saw just fat, failure, ease of humiliating." He paused. "But I learned something important. As they laughed, I studied. As they underestimated me, I strengthened me. And when the time came, I was ready." Rachel smiled, her eyes shining lightly. "You're amazing, you know. I'm persistent," he corrected again. "And now I have one responsibility, to ensure that no one else is humiliated the way I went." She got up, extending her hand. "It was an honor to work with you, Excellence." Dan Isle shook her hand. "The feeling is mutual." Asuroan. 2 months later, Marcus Brennan sat alone in a cheap cafe on the outskirts of town. He no longer wore Italian suits. There was no more office. He no longer had sycophantic assistants. The internal affairs investigation had revealed negligence in 18 cases. He was formally suspended indefinitely and was facing disciplinary proceedings that could result in permanent dismissal. The press tore him apart. Colleagues abandoned him. Even Greg, his former assistant, had requested a transfer to another city. Marcus was alone. He was absent-mindedly stirring a cup of cold coffee when he saw the headline in the newspaper, "Abandoned," on the table next to him. "Judge Daniel Carver receives Magistrate of the Year award for exemplary conduct and commitment to justice." There was a photo of Daniel next to the governor, holding a golden plaque, smiling discreetly. Marcus closed his eyes and let the newspaper fall. By that same night, Daniel was home. He took off his robe, hung it carefully in the closet, and placed the award on the shelf next to his law books. Then he went to the kitchen, made some tea, and sat down on the sofa. He picked up an old book, a worn-out copy of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and began to read. But before diving into the pages, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought about the fat boy who was ridiculed at school, in the teenager who heard laughter in the corridors, in the young man who saw contempt in the eyes of recruiters, in the man who was humiliated in full court, and he thought about how each of these pains, each of these scars, had shaped him, not in revenge, but in resilience, not in hate, but in justice. Daniel closed his eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, he felt peace. The next morning, he returned to court. There was a huge queue of processes waiting. Difficult cases, lives at stake, decisions that required wisdom, impartiality, and courage. Daniel put on his toga, straightened out his papers, and entered the courtroom. And when he struck the gavel for the first time that day, it was with the certainty that each blow echoed not just justice, but dignity. Because in the end, he learned the most important lesson. The best revenge is not destroying those who humiliated you. It's proving them wrong about you. It's rising so high that they can no longer reach you. And it's using your power, not to crush the weak, but to protect them. Daniel smiled slightly as he called the next case. And somewhere, far away, Marcus Brennan was still trying to understand how he had so underestimated the man he called fat. But Daniel no longer thought about him. He had work to do, justice to serve, and lives changing. If you've made it this far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because stories of overcoming, justice, and exciting twists like this appear every week. And remember, never underestimate anyone, because you never know who's sitting next to you or on the bench above you. Try again.